And now let me introduce Marie-Therese Haj Ahmad. She has worked for several years as a social worker in a homelessness services, particularly in Berlin, and is currently a research associate at the Gesellschaft für innovative Sozialforschung und Sozialplanung, GES e.V. in Bremen. Her research focuses on the social issue of homelessness, with a particular emphasis on homelessness among EU citizens in Germany. She is giving a presentation on non-shelter mobile EU citizens in Germany. And now it's your turn. It's a pleasure having you on stage.
Yes, thank you very much for the warm introduction. Thank you very much for inviting me here. I'm very happy to talk a little bit about my dissertation project, and I will take you to the field of homelessness and homeless services, assistance to homeless people in Germany. In my talk, I will present some of the findings from my doctoral research on homelessness, especially among EU citizens, mobile EU citizens in Germany. So just to have an idea in what the numbers about this social problem of homelessness among EU citizens in Germany. In the beginning of 2022, so 2.5 years ago, approximately almost 30,000 people experiencing homelessness in Germany had a passport of an EU member state, and especially most of them, or a large proportion of those people, came of the so-called Eastern European countries. And since many years already, this problem of homelessness of intra-EU migrants has been very much discussed in the homeless sector and also in the media, but still there's no perspective, no solution visible. So before I go deeper, I want to start with a data excerpt from my research that sheds some light on some of the stories I found during my research. Stories of European violence, of conscious and unconscious actions, but also of resistance and of the struggle for autonomy. The context of the following data excerpt. It doesn't work. I would like to show you. Could you just help me for it? Okay, I click there. So the context of this data excerpt is the participatory process to revise Berlin's homelessness assistance, which was and continues to be initiated and coordinated by the Berlin Senate Department for Integration, Labor and Social Affairs. Following a meeting of the sub-working group called EU Citizens, in which the participants wanted to write down their results, I wrote down the following field note. In the discussion is suggested to think again about what the content of this extra chapter they want to write should be, or its heading. Should they call it EU citizens, or implementation of the principle of equality, or exclusion from benefits and its consequences? These were the suggestions. And then one of the participants spoke up and said, I don't think it's right to see the exclusion from benefits as the problem. There is graduated assistance. It is the Eastern European and the Southeastern European groups that are the problem, where the offers of social assistance are naturally lower. I've spoken to embassies about this. This was very interesting for me. It covers a lot of the topics that I try to research. And in my research, in general, I looked at the intersection of homelessness and intra-EU migration. From the perspective of critical migration and Europeanization studies, and I reconstructed homelessness among EU citizens as an effect of an intra-EU migration regime. So my research took me to homeless support centers and conference halls, to Berlin authorities and to Brussels offices. And the analysis of struggles, concrete struggles and negotiations at various levels and various locations enabled me a specific insight into the attempts to govern intra-EU European migration. So through this special border regime, intra-EU border regime, Europe, that's my point, my argument, Europe is repeatedly reproduced and stabilized as a hegemonic project. And one central mechanism for this is the othering of certain people. I call it the production of Europe's inner others. And this production happens based on racist, classist, and moral concepts and structures. And as an effect, these others, these people constructed as others, experience inclusion and especially exclusion until homelessness. So in this way, EU-European borders are shifted from geographical peripheries to new actors on the national and even on the municipal level. And the European borders ultimately no longer run only along the geopolitical borders, like called something geopolitical outside, but also what we call the centers of Europe, for example, in Berlin, the capital of Germany, one of the largest countries. So in the following, I will take a closer look to this production of these inner others and shed some light on some mechanisms that do other homeless EU citizens threefold. As Eastern Europeans, as Roma, and as homeless people, homeless EU citizens are assigned a specific position as Europe's inner others. And this happens in different ways through different mechanisms. In particular, discursively through the debate on so-called, what we say, poverty migration or abuse of social benefits. It happens also legally through the exclusion from minimum social benefits, which secure a livelihood, and through concrete actions of public authority employees, as well as by people working in social work. As Jure said, I'm myself a social worker, so it was very interesting for me also to look at my own profession and to people from my own profession, how they behave and what they do. So, first, the juridification of the field is one very central mechanism for producing and excluding so-called Eastern Europeans as inner others. The intra-EU European border regime consists of a net of EU and national law, especially national social and police law, of bureaucratic administrative action, and further translations of law into everyday life by various actors. For example, EU citizens who are not employed are excluded from the minimum social benefits that secure their livelihood unless they have previously worked in Germany. Very short, I keep it very short. It's highly complicated, but that's the general idea of this law. And in addition, in practice, EU citizens are often unlawfully, or at least legally very controversial discussed. They are very often denied the right to accommodation in case of involuntary homelessness if they do not receive social benefits. And this right is not questioned in case of people experiencing homelessness with a German passport. They get automatically accommodated, people with a EU passport, normally not, especially if they come from the so-called Eastern European member states. But apart from the access to social benefits, this exclusion is justified by this distinction between a true and not true need for assistance. Because, as even one judge at the Federal Administrative Court put it, would like to show you. EU citizens, he says, EU citizens, unlike foreign third country nationals, can return to their EU country of origin at any time. Their neediness ends when they leave the federal territory. EU citizens can normatively rely on their existence being guaranteed in their EU country of origin. This is a bit controversial to the idea of free movement and freedom of movement within the European Union. So these practices and these laws exclude people from basic human rights, from what we call civilization minimum, and these exclusions affect a disproportionate number of homeless EU citizens from Eastern European countries, as they are more often at high risk of precarious work conditions and labor exploitation, as we heard already. And these working conditions are highly interconnected with housing insecurity and homelessness. So consequently, in practice, EU citizenship is often equated with Eastern European nationality, with no entitlement to social benefits and no regulatory or no accommodation by police law. This happens in practice without examining the individual case. So you can just have to imagine a person goes to an office, to the to a social worker or to an administrative law office to be accommodated because the person says, I don't have a place where to stay, please accommodate me for this night, and has to show the passport, and it's, for example, a Polish passport, and then it's immediately the reaction of the worker there, oh, difficult, probably not, please go first and ask for your social benefits entitlements. A German national would never experience this. So, just an example for the result, homeless EU citizens, especially from the so-called Eastern European countries, are not only without secure housing, but often also without any income, or vice versa. Furthermore, the second point, homeless EU citizens in particular are often read and positioned as Roma on the basis of anti-Roma stereotypes and patterns of interpretation. This happens discursively, the German-speaking or living people in Germany know that, but it happens also in the humanitarian fields of homelessness assistance and medical care for homeless people, as I have repeatedly experienced in the course of my research. This was most impressively for me during the so-called integration days in a day center for homeless people. They had a paper, now they don't have anymore, but a few years ago they had a paper at the entrance door where it was written in German and in Romanian a bit different, but here's the English translation, dear guests, also for our Romanian-speaking guests, we want to offer an extensive program, we can only carry this out on 2 days in the week, Tuesday and Wednesday, and we ask for understanding that Romanian-speaking guests are only allowed to access our service on those 2 days. Thank you very much. My observation on one day, on the integration day, and another day showed that actually neither the language skills nor the respective passport opened up access to the facility on the other days, but phenotypical characteristics such as skin color or clothing style. For example, when I asked about the praxis, what they do here, one employee, I think it was a volunteer, explained me. You can recognize the Romanians. And I asked him, how exactly can you recognize just from vision the Romanians? Well, the women, for example, look at them. You can see that. He was a bit irritated by my question. It was very clear for him. And the third point, in addition, homeless EU citizens are constructed as inner others due to their social status, to their social situation, social problem of homelessness. And in my research, I was able to reconstruct two main figures. The figure of the disruptor of the social order and the figure of the, as someone put it, the good old bum. Someone told me in the past, there was still the good old bum, yes, and the person who also aroused pity, and where there was also a great deal of solidarity, I would say, here in the population, and people understood that. So both figures, the disruptor of the social order and this pitiable person, stand for the other of the normative ideas of a conformist bourgeois life. The latter moves within the socially accepted code of behavior and is therefore constructed as a pitiable, incapable subject. But both these inner others serve as a warning counterpart to the majority of society, as well as an object of its own benevolence. So, come to the conclusion. These productions of homeless EU citizens as inner others and the associated production and reproduction of, as Jens Adam et al. Put it, intra-European topographies of inequality, with a finely graded system of participation hierarchies based on racist, classist, and or normative concepts is of central importance for Europe, for EU Europe. And Eastern Europe, the construct, plays a very important role here, but in the field of homelessness and research on homelessness, it has so far largely not been reflected upon, which makes it, of course, also impossible to reflect on potential discrimination here. What follows from this? What can we learn? Some points. I think very much that further qualitative and quantitative research is needed on the effects of anti-Eastern European racism in order to recognize its structural anchoring and to counter the individualization and culturalization of social problems as found in the opening quote. Researching it in the context of homelessness and homeless services could reveal some of the underlying assumptions in a particular way, as many different subject constructions can be found here. Furthermore, I think there is a need for more detailed research on institutional othering, the production of the other by national and municipal authorities, as well as by volunteers and social workers and different professions in the welfare sector. In doing so, the actors' room for potential resistance should also be examined more closely. Finally, and I would like to end with this, I think the vision of Europe as a place of equality and justice, as it is embodied by intra-EU migrants through their migration decisions, this should be made more visible and given more space, even in the field of highly exclusion like homelessness. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marie, for your wonderful talk.